Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order and ask that our district clerk leads us in the pledge.
Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. May I have a motion, please, that the agenda of April 7th, 2015 be approved as submitted, and please check that you have an addendum in your folder.
So moved. Second.
Questions or comments? Thank you. All those in favor? 7 in favor, none opposed. Thank you. May I have a motion, please, that we approve the consent agenda as listed? Questions or comments? Thank you. All those in favor? 7 in favor, none opposed. Thank you. We have special reports. We promised the community an update on the superintendent's position. So, good evening. As mentioned at our March 17th meeting, the Penfield Board of Education is now ready to make an announcement regarding the position of Superintendent of Schools. Since his appointment to the role of acting superintendent, the board has had the opportunity to work closely with Dr. Putnam. In his capacity as acting superintendent, Dr. Putnam has demonstrated the qualities of an effective leader. He has tackled a number of challenging administrative, fiscal, and personnel issues while effectively handling the day-to-day operations of a high-performing school district. In addition, Dr. Putnam has overseen several facilities projects that were approved before he started in July 2014. Since January 2008, Dr. Putnam has served as both an assistant principal and principal of our high school, and as the acting superintendent this past year. During this time, he has impressed many with his strong work ethic and commitment to the district. His body of work since 2008, combined with his role as acting superintendent, is a confirmation that he is, in fact, the right person to keep our district focused on continued excellence. Over the past few months, Dr. Putnam was evaluated by the Board of Education. He underwent a performance review using the same tools as his predecessors. The board also sought and reviewed data and comments from community members as well as district staff. After careful review of the information and feedback received and taking into consideration the needs and values of the Penfield School District, the Board of Education has determined that Dr. Thomas Putnam is the right fit for the position of Superintendent of Schools and that a further search would not be necessary. At this time, board members, I'm going to need a motion, please. First, we are accepting the resignation of Dr. Thomas Putnam as Penfield Senior High School Principal effective April 7th, 2015. So may I have a motion, please, that we accept this resignation? Second. Questions or comments? Thank you. All those in favor? 7 in favor, none opposed. Thank you. May I have a motion, please, that the Board of Education hereby appoints Thomas K. Putnam as Superintendent of Schools. The employment agreement dated April 8, 2015 has been presented to and considered by the board at this meeting and is hereby approved, and the President is authorized to execute the agreement on behalf of the board.
So moved. Second.
Questions or comments? Thank you. All those in favor? 7 in favor, none opposed. Thank you. At this time, Dr. Putnam, you need to take the oath of office to the Superintendent of Schools. Will you please rise and raise your right hand and repeat after me? I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
of the Office of Superintendent of Schools
of the Office of Superintendent of Schools
in the Penfield Central School District
in the Penfield Central School District
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Can I say
So-
a couple words? Or no, you?
Thank you, everyone, for congratulating our newest superintendent, Dr. Thomas Putnam, and welcoming him into his new role. Dr. Putnam, would you like to say a few words?
You know me, if I get the microphone, I always have a few words. Most of the time, I'm thoughtful in what I have to say, and I take some time to write the advocacy letters that have gone out and communications through the school. But I also believe there are certain times in life that you have to speak from the heart, and that's one of those times, so I apologize if I fumble on any of my words. But I just want to say how proud I am. I came here as an assistant principal, stepped into the shoes of principal for 4 years. We moved here, my family, my wife and 2 boys moved here in 2008, 2009. We've been here ever since, and I just want to thank the Penfield community because they accepted us as residents of Penfield and just have made a wonderful home for our family here. I wanted to thank the Board of Education for supporting me and allowing me to support you in the work that you do to best serve our students and teachers and staff on an everyday basis. And I just wanted to say that one of the things I've always looked at is a team approach. So I refer to Penfield as Team Penfield, and teams don't always get along, and teams don't always see eye to eye, but on game day, teams go in and do what they need to do to win. And we'll always have times with disagreement, and we'll always have times where we don't see it eye to eye, but I believe so strongly in this team of our teachers, our staff, our clerical, buildings and grounds, transportation. I will forget a group, and I apologize in advance. But just all the great folks that come together to support our students. The Team Penfield motto, just so you know, has got a deeper meaning because before any Team Penfield existed, there was Team Putnam. And I would be amiss if I didn't say and thank my wife, Michelle, who's in the audience, and my 2 sons, Teague and Isaac, that attend Cobbles Elementary School, that I couldn't stand here, I couldn't do the late nights, I couldn't do the weekend work without a very supportive team at home. So I do appreciate Michelle and the boys and all the work that they do, and being here to support me. And again, finally, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Putnam. Our next order of business, just as exciting, textbook introduction.
Yes, that's what I'm here for.
All right.
Good evening. My name is Alana Tomer, and I'm here representing the 6th grade Social Studies Department over at Bay Trail. We're asking for board approval of the new 6th grade Social Studies textbook. The old textbook is 15 years old and no longer aligned with the new Social Studies framework and standards. We selected World History 2012 by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt to replace our current textbook. This textbook is fully aligned to the new Social Studies framework and the overreaching shifts toward conceptual understandings, student inquiry, and integration of content with skills. It is especially rich in primary source documents, which are an essential component of the new Social Studies framework. This textbook has online resources for students and teachers, as well as suggestions for differentiation of instruction. There is formative and summative assessments provided, which our 6th grade team can access and modify to fit the needs of their individual students. Overall, this textbook, combined with its online component, is a rich resource that will support an authentic, compelling 6th grade social studies curriculum fully aligned with the new framework.
All right. Well, thank you for coming this evening. Board members, at this time, do you have any questions or comments regarding the textbook? All right. Thank you. Thank you for coming, and if we have any questions, we will let you know.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we now move on to visitors speaking time, and I have an indication here that Mr. John Otney wishes to address the board. If you could please come up to the table, use the microphone so that we can hear you.
Sure thing.
Good evening, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the job that you guys and gals do. It's much appreciated, and congrats again, Dr. Putnam. My name's John Otney. I live at 43 Pinebrook Circle in Penfield. This year was the first year that my wife and I sent our little one off to kindergarten, and there were two things that concerned us. First was the safety of my child, and today we got to experience the new visitor policy at Harris Hill, where they scan your driver's license and they log you into the system, and I'd like to thank everybody that was involved in making that happen. That's really nice. Second was the quality of education. Now, I'm a product of Penfield Schools, graduate, so I know what Penfield has to offer. I wouldn't be where I am today without Penfield and the support of a board like you and everybody involved. But as a parent, I have a new perspective on the quality of education. Contrary to the opinion of some individuals employed by the district, and in accordance with your policy on naming individuals at an open forum like this, I did submit a letter. You have that letter?
We have that letter, thank you.
Cool. So I'd like to submit that on a particular individual employed by the district. I truly hope you do your due diligence when making a decision regarding that individual, and my wife and I are open to any discussion outside of the board meeting. But thank you. That's it.
Thank you, and we really appreciate your consideration of our policy and of keeping the name of the individual private.
You got it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, we now move on to our student representative. Good evening, Aubrey.
Hi. First, I'm going to start off with what happened before break. There were the national language exams held before break for Spanish, French, and Latin. And that week, the LOTE department held the World of Languages Week, where each day was dedicated to a different language. And on the announcements every morning, there would be a trivia question relating to the day's language. And students would turn in their answers to LOTE DIC. And out of the correct answers, there was one slip picked out of a hat each day, and that winner got a $5 Dunkin' Donuts gift card. Last Thursday, there was the annual AP US History field trip where the students went to the Strong Museum and listened to guest speakers on the Cold War and even got to spend some time in the exhibits. And Thursday for the middle school and Friday for the high school, there was an anti-bullying presentation where a former UFC fighter came in and discussed and emphasized the role of bystanders when it comes to bullying. The NAM Foundation has once again named Penfield Central School District among the best communities for music education. And boys lacrosse plays today at Fairport at 5, and they won versus Irondequoit over break 6-5. And the boys baseball and girls softball teams traveled to Myrtle Beach over break for a tournament, and the boys ended with a 2-2 record, and the girls ended with a 2-3. There's a Suzuki concert in the high school auditorium tomorrow at 7. And the NHS is holding their annual faculty feud this Friday in the high school auditorium, and it's at 6:30, and tickets are $6 at the door. And speaking of NHS, they're recruiting their members for next year already, and the forms and applications were due today. And March Madness announced their Sunday recipients, which will be held tomorrow after school, which were all the students that had perfect attendance and all passing grades in the month of March. And one-act plays are coming up, and the auditions for that were held today. Spring Drivers Education starts tomorrow, and I'm in student council, and we're in the beginning stages, but we're working to try to change homecoming and make it more of a community-based event instead of just involving the high school, because we took a closer look at homecomings in other towns, and they make it more of an elementary and middle school involved as well, so we're trying to have more activities geared towards younger students, so we're working on that currently.
All right, thank you. Board members, any questions or comments for Aubrey? All right, thank you. We now move on to Superintendent's report. Dr. Putnam.
We have, for the reports tonight, our student and staff honors, an update on the capital project, including the field lights in the high school gym, a budget, the 2015-16 benefits and totals around the budget, as well as revenue and the governor's budget. We could talk about that all night, but we're going to focus on just what we know at the moment. Wanted to get some student and staff honors, starting with Bay Trail Science Olympiad. 2 teams earned 23 medals in 21 events at the Science Olympiad, a Midwestern regional competition that took place at St. John Fisher in March. 30 students participated and 26 earned at least one medal. Team 8 brought home the second place trophy, while Team 7 finished 10th out of 20 teams. Bay Trail qualified to send a team to the state tournament being held in Syracuse on April 17th and 18th, and this is really, really great. And I know that Principal Winting Buddington and Steve Eccleston, AP at Bay Trail, are in the audience tonight, so they should be very proud, and hopefully we'll bring this back, just the pride we have for that Science Olympiad team. Charity basketball games, we had two. Indian Landing Elementary School and Cobbles Elementary School each held their own charity basketball game to support specific causes. Indian Landing red and white basketball game raised more than $1,000 for Building Futures for Kenya and Marbles for Mankind projects. And the Cobbles Cares basketball game raised more than $570 for Golisano Children's Hospital, as well as collected 10 boxes of food for the Penfield Food Shelf. I can say I was at the Cobbles basketball game with my kids, and we had a great time. It was a lot of fun to watch students and teachers interact in a really positive way, and a great funds for great causes. I will, as always, as you've seen, I always piggyback on our student representative to the board. And so she did already mention that we were selected as one of the best community for music education through the NAM Foundation. One of the pieces I find really amazing, that this is a national recognition, and we are one of only 388 districts nationwide to receive this honor. And a lot of that goes to Jim Dozer, who fills out lots of paperwork in order to get this honor. We know, even without that honor, that we're one of the best music communities, because you can go to our musical, you can go to our concerts, and you can see it and hear it firsthand, but it is always nice to be recognized. Robotics competition, we talk about this a lot because they're both amazing teams at the high school and Bay Trail. And Penfield High School's robotics team Rolling Thunder and Bay Trail's robotics team Oncoming Storm recently had successful competitions. Team Rolling Thunder earned the Chairman's Award, the highest award given at a competition in Montreal. The Chairman's Award honors the team that best represents a model for other teams to emulate and best embodies the purpose and the goals of FIRST. And Team Oncoming Storm out of Bay Trail made it to the final alliance in their division from a field of 36 teams at a tournament held at Scranton University. Congratulations to both teams and their coaches. I just want to mention the Chairman's Award is the most coveted in robotics because it is the go-to team to help. And so no matter what they're doing, no matter where they are in placement, our Penfield kids go out and help other robotics teams get their robots working. It's not always about winning. It's about truly that community event, and that's something to be really proud of. All-county festivals. Many Penfield students were selected to participate in the all-county festivals. Junior and senior jazz all-county. Brian Dunn, Bradley Farham, Cameron Gage, and Eric Hettel were selected to participate in the Junior-Senior Jazz All-County Festival. Senior High All-County, I go back on why we already know we're an amazing school for music, thanks to our staff and all the hard work from our students and families. 37 Penfield High School students were selected to participate in the Senior High All-County Festival. At the Junior High All-County, 15 Bay Trail students were selected to participate. And at the Elementary All-County, 31 elementary students were selected to participate in the Elementary All-County Festival. And I will end with one more piggyback off our student representative, which is tomorrow night is the Suzuki concert. And as we sit here, both Dr. Sansucci and I will be there in the audience supporting our children who both take Suzuki lessons. And so it's just a really great concert to come out and see what they're going to look like before they get to high school, because they sound beautiful, but they do a lot of hard work. And I will now turn it over to Mark Sansucci for the construction update on field lights in the East Gym.
Thank you. This is with regard to update on the progress of approval towards field lights. This also has to do with the East Gym, but really more specifically, the field lights that we'd hope to install this upcoming summer. So want to just remind the board and the public where we're at with regard to approval and that project. So if you recall, we asked for voter approval of that in February of 14. That was successful, and so you begin the design process. The architects complete the plans and specifications and submit them to SED for approval. what that is really is our building permit. So a school district's a municipality in the eyes of New York State, so we don't go through the town for our building permit. Our building permit essentially comes through this state education department process. So that's what we're waiting for. And without that, we can't go forward. So the SED login date for that, when they received our materials, they actually received them probably a week ahead of that, but when they finally get around to stamping them received, was August 20th, and they were assigned review number 224. There are at least 3 levels of approval. One of those is an architectural approval, and we cleared that hurdle fairly quickly. And then you'll recall from previous board meetings, we received special permission. Normally you would wait for the full approval before you did any bidding, but we requested special approval and were granted authority to bid just the gym floor remediation early. So we've done that bid. We have those bid results, and we could be getting ready to tear up that gym floor. But we haven't. Because of the rest of this project. So really we need final approval because we need to be able to replace the floor we tear up. So while we're focused on the lights, the gym floor itself also comes into play. We'd anticipated approval based on sort of a conservative schedule, a schedule that allowed plenty of time for approval in February, end of February, early March. Obviously, we're past that date as we sit here tonight, and we don't have approval. SED is currently reviewing plan number or submission number 135. If you'll recall, we're submission number 224. So there's quite a few projects between us and an approval. 6 plans we've been tracking this. We've met regularly. We're tracking the progress of this. 6 plans were reviewed during the past week, and in the last 3 months, only 30 engineering projects were reviewed. Essentially, what's happened is, and while I'd love to blame SED, this is the facilities planning portion of that organization. They're essentially understaffed. Their budget's been frozen for a number of years. They haven't been able to replace people that have retired, left, moved to different organizations. And as a result, they're down to essentially 1 engineer or 2 engineers reviewing all of the plans for the entire state, school district submissions for the entire state of New York. By law, the Big 5 submissions, Big 5 school districts have priority. So they're, in all fairness, doing the best they can, but it is enormously slow, and it's impacting school districts across New York State, but obviously we're concerned about ours. So we've done some, we've had some conversation around what does this mean, because we'd made a commitment to the public that our intention was to get the project done over the course of this upcoming summer for play in the fall. Our best case scenario was that, and this is recently, these slides are the result of some fairly recent work, and already our best case scenario has come and gone. So our best case scenario was that we'd received SED comments on the plans on April 1st. That means really that they've picked them up. They've looked at them, they've begun to review them, and typically they'll have comments. What about this? Did you consider this? I'd like to see this other change. And that tells us as a consumer of this that the process has really begun, because right now they're waiting their turn. Nothing's happening. They're sitting on a shelf waiting their turn. With those comments, what we proposed is that we would immediately advertise bids once we got comments, because once they pick it up, it goes fairly quickly. Normally, you would wait until you had the final approval in hand, then you would advertise, then you would go ahead. We propose once we get comments, we'll advertise, we'll anticipate approval a couple of weeks later, April 15th in this example. We'd receive bids on the 30th then, so we would be receiving bids after the approval, so we're all legal, but we've compressed the time frame just as tightly as we could. Based on that, we would award contracts on June 1st, complete the work over the course of the summer, and have our first football game on September 3rd. In this best-case scenario that's already passed, I'm not sure we would go forward with the gym because we would be bidding the gym and the gym replacement, the gym floor replacement, really in April, and that's, by then, that's so late in the year that many contractors have their work booked. It's not a favorable bidding environment. We would go ahead with the lights because the electrical contract portion of this is very small. We've made arrangements to purchase the lights on a piggyback contract, essentially a state contract. The same thing for the required switchgear. So the contractor portion of this that we're waiting on is relatively small. But as you can see, as you know, this best case scenario is already come and gone. Our next scenario is acceptable. So in this analysis, we'd get comments mid-April. And if that were true, the rest of that schedule falls out, and we would make the September, we believe we could make the September 26th homecoming game. So we'd still be in the football season if we receive those SED comments really within the next week. And really our last hope, or we're calling it here the drop-dead scenario, is a June 1st approval, June 1st comments. If that's the case, we would be done by October, we know we host typically 1 or 2 sectional games, so it might not be football, but it is possible that we could host a sectional game under the lights. Once we get past June 1st, really it would become next year's work. So with regard to that, we're probably at this point not going to go forward with the gym floor abatement. Gary Hoffman is in conversation with the successful bidder for that gym, for the abatement, to see if he will hold his bid. It's a long time to hold a bid, so I'd anticipate a change order to him of some value. But as you know, we got very, very competitive pricing. We don't want to throw that back to the wind. So we're in those conversations. The piggyback award of the transformer and switchgear will help us, but they have lead times, and we're still waiting we've put those vendors on notice, but we're still waiting for approval to finally pull the trigger, issue the purchase orders, and get the build process started for those. So I've recommended, and I built into the budget that you'll see here in a little bit, that we include $150,000 additional allowance for potential increased costs, both for timing as we give it a year's worth of inflation and potential increased costs as we work into this. We should, and I have planned to build that into our general fund budget. So the the backup at SED is, it's not just impacting us, but certainly this is a very public and I think long-awaited project. So we've reached out. We have a meeting scheduled this upcoming Friday with the boosters. That notice has already gone out. Dr. Putnam and I will be meeting with them to have sort of share this information, the same conversation. We're working on some potential alternatives. We have played under lights before, not the lights, not permanent lights, but it should be possible for us to arrange some of the highway-style lights and at least have a game under lights. We're having that conversation. I should also, the other thing we've done in hopes of expediting this, I would ask if Dr. Putnam could just bring us up to date. We had conversations directly with SED. They understand our problem, but again, their hands are a bit tied, but I think it's useful if we relayed that.
I can add that at the Albany advocacy trip that we went on at the end of March, and several board members, myself, Carol Nazar and I sort of snuck our way into the SED building by simply saying, we have an appointment at Buildings and Facilities, and once we got there, they were very, very nice. And so what Dr. Sansucci mentions is absolutely true. This is an underfunded portion of SED. They're working hard. They sat down, they spent about a half hour with us going over everything. They pulled the file. There are three levels of approval, and we've gotten through 2. In the last one we're waiting on is the engineer architectural approval, which is understaffed at the moment. So they're aware. we met with, met with Rich Funky, and he was aware of the lights project without us mentioning it. So there are some folks who are in Albany trying to work through the program and to see what we can get. The reality is it's lights on a field. So Mark mentioned the Big Five, sort of always, the Big Five school districts always are going to come first. And it's not a safety issue. We don't have a roof that collapsed and we don't have a school open. So SED is not going to put this in front of anything else that potentially is a safety issue. The last piece is, I did call and have a conversation after we returned from Albany with Carl Thurman, I don't know what his title is.
I'm not sure, the director, I think.
Really the director of
He's the head
SED.
of that division.
And he understands too. And so, he was kind enough to pull out our big, huge file again and take a look at where we fell and take a look at the numbers. And at that point, he still had some hope that it was going to move along, but unfortunately, it's moving along at a snail's pace. I want the community to know, that's why we're having the meeting on Friday, to be as transparent and open as possible. This is not an issue where our district is slowing things down. It is happening, unfortunately, from State Education Department due to staffing and the issues that they're having. The piece I want the community to truly understand is that is still that's what we voted for, that's what we're looking at, we want those lights there. What we don't want to happen is to try to throw something up too quick. We want to make sure that they're there and they're safe and they're what we want. So, the drop dead scenario is what we're looking at, and obviously worst case is we're deferring until next year and have them up in the fall of 2016. Nobody's goal, nobody's desire, but we also want to make sure we give the Penfield field what it deserves. So
I'd also
appreciate Mark. Good
also in the audience is Vic Tomaselli, the district's architect, and who does have some news, I think, with regard to some updated approval information, so it might be useful to share that
Did you get an
with the
email
board.
right before this meeting, Vic?
Well, not an email, but first of all, thank you for having me here. I mentioned to Mark earlier that SED updates their website on Tuesdays as far as where projects are and where they are in the mix. And there is some good news. They haven't reviewed ours yet, but they are on, as of today, they are on project review number 188. And if you remember Mark's earlier slide, our number is 224. So within the last week, they advanced 53 projects.
That's great.
When in the past 3 months, they advanced 30. So I don't know what happened, but something happened, and they cut loose a lot of smaller projects probably, and they are catching up. So we need another week like last week, and we'll be in great shape a week from now. But who knows? It's time will tell. But it is good news.
Right, it is good news. Hope's not lost, but I think we just wanted to update the board and the community as to where we're at. There is a possibility that it swings back to the old way and no projects are approved. So we're a bit at their mercy, and we'll see how this goes.
Great, thank you. Now, every Tuesday we're going to be waiting for an email from you.
Okay. Well, I update Mark every try to update Mark every week. So.
All right, thank
Are there
you.
any other questions for Vic?
Board members, Camille.
I noticed in the first two scenarios, you have about a month in between the receiving the bids and awarding the contracts. And in the third scenario, the drop dead one, you've telescoped that time period into more like 2 weeks. So there is some flexibility in how long you put the bids out and award the contracts?
There's a legal minimum. Those bids need to be advertised for a minimum of 7 days, I believe. But there's a practical requirement that in order for it to be a quality bid, the documents have to be in contractors' hands. You're not going to get good results. They either won't bid it or they'll throw a number at it that you might not like. So, and Vic can probably answer.
Yeah, that's a good explanation. If you've all seen our plans and specs, they're usually, the spec book is pretty big, and the drawings, there's a number of drawings that are broken down by trade, and contractors just need a reasonable amount of time to study and understand those documents. to do their material takeoffs, to contact suppliers. You know, they have to read the spec and understand what it is we require from an equipment standpoint. They need to reach out to their vendors to get pricing. So all of that does take some legitimate time to do. So there is some flexibility, but there is also the practical aspect of, you know, what's reasonable. So certainly, certainly not less than 2 weeks, and, you know, 3 to 4 is more comfortable.
And once the district receives the bids, how long does it, in-house, does it take for you to award it? Because I know you have to go with the lowest bidder, but.
Yeah, there is a bit of a process there. So that is in part Campus Construction's work. So they need to, they'll interview the low bidder. They'll make sure they understand the work. They'll look into their qualifications. They'll make, you know, they need to do their due diligence to make sure that that contractor understood the project, that they understood what they were bidding on, that they're, you know, that they meet the requirements of the bid itself. And after that, it's really a board matter. We need to get you together to award it. You know, I think in the past you've been flexible about doing a meeting in the morning and so forth. But now all of that does take a little bit of time. And it sort of depends on the complexity of what you're bidding. In this case, I really don't anticipate, you know, it's you know, I wouldn't want to guess at the dollar amount of the electrical contract just for the field lights, but it's going to be very small. It's not a complicated project. The majority of the material will already have been ordered, so.
Okay.
Is that fair, Vic?
No, that's very fair. As Mark said, it won't be a very large sum of money. The documents won't be that complex for the electrical portion, so we can vet the contractor, the low bidder, relatively quickly, you know, assuming there are no issues or informalities or problems with their bid. If there are, then we may need to go to the next bidder. And so, you know, as long as everything goes along smoothly, it should be a relatively quick process.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, if there's no problem, there's no problem. But
Right.
then we're not usually that lucky. So.
Any additional questions or comments? Right. Thank you, Vic.
Thank you.
Hoping
Thank you
for
very
more
much.
good news.
Thank you. Congratulations, Dr. Putnam.
Thank you. Thanks, Vic. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. The next superintendent's report's the 2015-16 budget. Tonight we'll be taking a look at the last routine portion of the budget, which is essentially benefits for all of the employees in the previous portions. And then we'll be taking a look at totals and having some discussion with regard to the governor's budget. So we always begin these presentations with a review of our district goals. They are the linchpin upon which we build this entire budget, those goals of academic excellence, partnership, and fiscal responsibility. I'm going to turn it over to Tom to have some conversation about what that's looked like for us.
Yeah, you know, you all know how I feel about the district, but for the community too, a lot of things that we look at in terms of building a bright future, and reminders for the community and maybe new for some people who haven't had a student through the high school yet. But the Penfield High School graduation rate is 96% on average. It's 20% above the state average. Last year, 144 high school students were designated as AP scholars based off their exceptional achievement on the AP exams, including 11 national scholars. Penfield graduates annually garner hundreds of thousands of dollars in scholarships to colleges and universities. Last year's class is estimated at about $1.6 million of scholarships that they pulled in. Doesn't mean they accepted all of them, but it's still a huge number based on the great work our students do academically in school. 88% of our graduates in 2014 continued on to college. 96% of our graduates earned a Regents diploma, 69% earned an advanced designation diploma, but both great numbers to brag about in Penfield. And highly competitive SAT scores. They exceed the state mean on both math, reading, and writing. And then some of the things we've mentioned here in many different ways, but the Penfield High School was named to Newsweek's 2014 list of best American high schools. I'll tell you that it's number 1, but Newsweek will put it a little bit lower than that. Cobbles Elementary School was named the 2014 National Blue Ribbon School, and Harris Hill, one of our other elementary schools, was named that just a few years ago. And all 4 Penfield elementary schools rank in the top 20 out of more than 159 schools in the Rochester area last year based on 4 years of test scores. And Penfield Central School District, again, as we mentioned tonight, was named in the 2014 Best Communities for Music Education. We have just a lot to brag about in Penfield, and we get that with a strong board and strong administrators, amazing teachers in the classroom, and all the work that people put in, including very supportive families of the school district and wonderful students. Our budget calendar, just as a reminder, back in January, Mark started all of our updates around the budget. And we are now, if we click through, we're now down to April 7th, and that budget review and the proposed budget, including benefits, revenue, and fund balance in the complete budget. And I'll turn it back over to Mark to go through the numbers of where we are now.
Thank you very much. And of course, the remaining piece there is that at our next board meeting on April 21st, we'll be needing to approve and adopt. That board meeting's obviously a Tuesday. This year, by the way the calendar falls in the vote, the last legal day for adoption of the budget's that Friday. So really, we don't have lots of leeway built in this year. But it is good that it was pushed out as far as it did, just because of sort of the oddity of the state budget. Before we get into that or into the totals, we need to finish our routine presentations. Tonight, we're talking about all benefits, including health, retirement, Social Security. It's about a quarter of our budget, and it's down this year about $428,000, 1.8%. It's a $23.5 million budget. And what's down in that, as you would expect, health insurance costs continue to rise, although not at the pace that we've seen in some past years. What's really down are the retirement system costs. So employees' retirement and teacher retirement, by law, full-time employees of the school district must belong to one or the other, certified staff and teachers' retirement and non-certified staff and employees. And those retirement systems have been going up at an enormous pace for the past several years. The retirement systems are funded by, really in 3 ways. They're funded by a stream of revenue from individual employees who contribute a share of their salary to the system. They're also funded by returns on investments that those systems hold. They both hold billions of dollars in investment in a wide variety of investment vehicles. And so the market drives some of their returns and their ability to meet their obligations. And in 2009, I think we all remember what happened to the market. Teachers' retirement, for example, lost a quarter of its value in a very short period of time. And as a result of that, the third revenue stream is employers' contributions. And our contributions began to go up at a double-digit clip. Some details of that are in this year's goals, assumptions, and guidelines, but now we're seeing the net effect of that performance working its way out. 2009 now drops out of the calculation, and they've had good returns. The market's doing fine for the last couple of years. So we see those decreases here and a significant decrease overall in this budget. Whether that continues or not is something that I think we need to consider carefully. What you see at the far right hand is that decrease. See the little, it nudges down. That's a good thing. But I think if you look back at that history, this is about 52, 53 years of the retirement system. You can see that for decades it was around 20%. And then it began to fall almost to nothing during the years of the tech bubble and that boom, and then has been climbing its way back up ever since. Another sharp drop based on the 2009 performance. So, whether this is a permanent condition or a temporary one, we don't know, but we do know, if we believe in history, that we had 3 decades in double digits, and so far, for this decade so far, we're only at about 12%. So we'll see. but take good news when you find it, and we are. So I think it's good news, at least in the short term for us. We'll see what happens as that unfolds. What that means is, though, once we roll it into the rest of our budget, that we are at just about 2%, just under 1.9% budget-to-budget increase. The administrative budget is down. Program capital and BOCES are, as you saw, presented. The only change that's been made going backwards to these is the increase of that $150,000 that we just discussed in the capital project to that capital budget. So that drove that up a little bit more than the presentation that you saw a couple of months ago when we looked at that. But again, overall at exactly 1.9%. This is what that looks like year over year by the various components of the budget, $90.8 million in total. And you can see the decrease in the benefits bars furthest to the right. Slight decreases in the other budget areas, and it all offsets a bit. For a total of $1.6 million overall. That's really, of course, as you know, only half of our budget, and this has been sort of the interesting portion of this year's work, because the governor declined in his budget to present. When he presented his budget to give us estimates of our state aid. And this slide shows you that 25% of our budget depends on that state aid. 66% of our budget's from the tax levy, and 9% from everything else. Everything else from appropriations of reserves, fund balance, lost textbook fees, and so forth are all in that 9%. So that 25% portion is significant, and this year we were sort of flying blind. Those of you that have been on the board for some time can remember, for a long time, we had late adopted budgets. I can remember having final budget numbers in August, well after the adoption and even the approval by our voters of our budget. But what was significantly different in those years was at least we had a number to key off of. In any of those years, there was a governor's budget and governor's numbers that we could work off of, and also all of those conversations predated the tax cap. We just had, as a board and a community, a lot more flexibility to work. So this was completely unbroken ground, but they did finally manage to bring it all together at the sort of the 11th hour. Or the 12th hour even, and adopted a state budget. So $1.3 billion increase overall in the state computerized aids, and really focused in two different areas. Foundation aid, which is the single largest statewide single aid. There's probably 40 different aid categories. Foundation aid, by far the largest one. And it was adopted during the Patterson administration, and intended to be a foundational support of schools. It was designed, it's a fairly complicated formula, but it was designed fairly rationally to recognize community support, community ability to pay, the need of students, and to provide a foundation of money that would provide an appropriate education. It's never been fully implemented. From the day they designed the formula, almost immediately, New York State began to run into fiscal woes, and it's been frozen year over year over year. So this year, while not unfreezing it, they certainly put money into it. They targeted it to high-need districts with a minimum for all districts of 0.4% or a maximum of 15, depending on a series of formulas. You could get up to a maximum of a 15% increase in that particular aid category. They also addressed gap elimination adjustment, which was a negative aid category adopted really in the last few years. It's really a take-back of money from schools. And they cut that about in half. So that's $600 million increase statewide, about $400 and $33 million remains unfunded, and they adopted a 4-tier formula for distribution of that as well. All the other aids, the expense-based aids, building aid, textbook aid, BOCES aid, so on, the formulas are unchanged. Your aid might go up and down, and does, depending on your expenses or what's going on in your district, but the formulas themselves were unfiddled with. So what does that mean for Penfield? Our foundation aid, and you should be gratified, we talked about this during our budget workshop. You'll remember that foundation aid really, the way aid has rolled out over the last couple of years, gap elimination adjustment was really left for the Long Island districts and the suburban districts, and foundation aid was really the area that would left that in as they work their way through these formulas that would target the big five and the high need districts. And so you see that play out in Penfield. By the time you work through the formulas, our foundation aid increase of the, what was it, $400 million is $47,000. It's that aid was not targeted towards Penfield. We got the bare minimum, the 0.37%. Suburban districts, Long Island, we look more like them on the numbers in terms of wealth and wealth per pupil. We received about $899,000. So that's about cut in half. Well, actually, I should say 37%, cut in half statewide. About $1.5 million remains from our being fully funded. So our gap elimination adjustment hasn't gone away. It remains $1.5 million, but it's been significantly reduced. So I'll come to the I'll bring this all back together with regard to the revenue side of the budget, but there were other budget initiatives that were all tied together. So if you'll recall, one of the reasons that we didn't have state aid numbers was that the governor wanted, one of his initiatives was you'll get your money, you'll get your numbers when you pass these certain reforms that I value. So it was really I think a negotiating ploy with the state legislature. I think there was a belief on his part that schools would rise up and put pressure on the legislature. I don't think it quite turned out the way he expected it to, but at any rate, there were significant changes with regard to teaching in New York State. So if we take a moment, I'd have asked Mr. Pfeiffer to speak to that.
Thank you, Dr. Sansucci. I want to just start, before we talk about any of the information that follows, that this is really, the information we have right now is very skeletal in nature. There has been a big push, even though the bill was passed through the legislature. Much of the details of what we're going to talk about need to be flushed out by the State Education Department and the Commissioner by the end of this school year, June 30th, to then be tackled by local education agencies and districts. So we have some information, and that's what we're going to share tonight, but there is still quite a bit of information that we do not yet know, and a lot of answers that we don't yet have and that we're going to need in order to move forward. But we just want to bring everybody up to speed as to what we do know at this point in time. So the first of which is the annual professional performance review process. That's the evaluation system for all teachers and principals in all districts. The new components, the changes to that, is that it will be reduced to 2 components only. Currently, the system that we've been using for the last 3 years, including this year, is 3 components: observations, a growth score, and an SLO, and then an additional local, and it's broken up 60% of the score based on observations, 20% of the score based on the growth score, the student learning objective, the SLO, and then 20% based on a local assessment score. The governor has pushed very hard and was successful in changing the system so that now it's basically a 50-50 system, 50% based on the observations and 50% of the teacher and principal score will be based on a growth score or a student performance measure of some type. It might be a student learning objective. The reason the governor pushed so hard for that is the view was that the ratings the teachers were receiving and principals were receiving across the state were not very well correlated with these test scores and student performance across the state. There's a lot of conversation that can take place about the validity of that data, but this is really the push to move to this 50-50 type system. So that's a very significant change. We'll talk a little bit about the details of each of those components in the slides that follow. The first of which is observations. And under the new system, what we do know is that every teacher and principal will have an observation by the principal or the designee in the case of teachers. For principals, it will likely be the superintendent or a designee. They will also be required to have at least one observation by an independent evaluator. We're really unclear on exactly who all will qualify as an independent evaluator. What we do know our options may be anyone from within the district but outside of the building. So in the case of our high school, it couldn't be necessarily the principal and an assistant principal from the high school. It would have to be the principal or the assistant principal from the high school and then someone else from within the district but outside the building. That could be other assistant principals, other principals, district office staff, but that's an option. Other options are from other districts locally, universities, or privately contracted individuals who are certified to perform observations. But we don't have a complete list yet at this time, and we don't understand fully what all the options are just yet. Then there is an optional third observation, which could be by another teacher that would have to have been already rated as highly effective or effective and I see an error in my slide, it should be E or HE, and I apologize for that, but they would have to have already received a rating of highly effective or effective to be able to participate in providing this optional third observation. That option needs to be locally negotiated between the district and our teacher and principal unions to determine whether or not we want to include that. And there are a lot of logistical concerns and, again, details that we don't yet know about what it would look like to try and include that option for our teachers and principals. One other piece that we do know within the system is that if a teacher receives a rating of I or ineffective on the observation portion, no matter what happens on the student performance portion, the highest rating a teacher or principal could then get would be a D or a developing rating. So again, we see that 50-50-ness of the governor's work in this regard. So really controlling how these ratings can come out. In terms of the growth scores or the SLOs, the student learning objectives, we know right now, or we believe that growth scores will apply to teachers of ELA and math in grades 3 through 8 as Regents courses as well as principals. This is still a little bit unclear currently under the system. The growth scores are only provided for teachers of ELA and math in grades 3 through 8. This year, however, the Algebra Regents exam will count toward teachers' growth score for teachers who are in eighth grade teachers who teach algebra. That's new. And we haven't seen the Regents exams be part of teacher growth scores yet. And so I think we're seeing that they're laying the groundwork for being able to provide growth scores for courses that end in Regents exams, and we'll start to see more of that. But still, again, a lot of details that we need to see. Will it work for third grade teachers who do not currently receive a growth score from the state? Have they figured out a way to do that? We don't know yet. And the bill isn't very clear on whether or not they will be included in that regard. Everyone else will have to do a student learning objective. However, I think we're going to see the parameters, the rules for creating those tighten up significantly and have many of those parameters set by the state education department and by the commissioner. Again, details that we don't have, that we don't anticipate having until June 30th at the earliest. Again, we have another option here to include a second assessment. So not just relying on the state-provided growth score, but they're giving districts an option, which we have to locally negotiate with our teacher and principal unions, to include a second assessment. This assessment would either have to be developed by state ed or something that's been developed by someone else and approved by state ed. It could be potentially be a third-party vendor. In a climate that we have now with many of the concerns about the amount of assessment, I don't know how viable an option this would be. And another piece that doesn't make it a very viable option, I think right off the bat, is that if you do choose, if the district and unions do choose to use the 2 assessment option, and a teacher or principal were to get a rating of I or ineffective, automatically their overall rating will be an ineffective regardless of what happens on the observation portion. So that is, a strong statement there, I think, on what the governor is trying to do with this change. So again, it has to be locally negotiated. If only one assessment is used, so we only use the state-provided growth scores or the SLOs, and a teacher were to get an ineffective rating, then the possibility goes up that they can get a developing and not necessarily an ineffective. So this is really changing the game in the rating system for our teachers and principals with these new requirements. Other information around APPR and changes, typically we don't know what the percentages will be in terms of yet the various components within a system, within a rubric that we use to evaluate our teachers and principals. We don't know what the weights are going to be and how we determine how to figure out if a teacher gets a highly effective, developing, or ineffective within the observation itself. We need to wait for the guidance from New York State in order to be able to make those determinations. We don't know what those rules and guidelines are going to be yet. One major change is that a lot of the work that we do in terms of evaluating our teachers and principals is based on the evidence or artifacts that they submit to their principals or to the superintendent for the principal evaluations, because the observations are really just such a small snapshot. You might see one full lesson and then a part of another lesson. And so you can't see everything that our teachers are doing or that our principals are doing. And so we rely on evidence that they submit, lesson plans. Sometimes we get information from students and parents from the community that help inform the ratings. Some districts have used tools like that. I don't know that we necessarily have here. Those are going to be disallowed in the future. It seems that it's going to be very strictly based on what is observed in the moment in the classroom or in the building in the case of a principal, which really narrows the scope quite a bit, I think, and doesn't maybe give us the opportunity to see much of the great things that our teachers and principals are doing. So that's a big change. If a teacher were to be rated as ineffective for 2 consecutive years, a student cannot be placed with that. I'm sorry, let me start again. A student cannot be placed with teachers who have been rated ineffective 2 years in a row. So a student moving from, say, 4th grade to 5th grade, if that student's teacher was rated as ineffective during the 4th grade year, they can't be placed with a teacher who was rated ineffective for 5th grade. That's going to be very, very challenging for us, and I think many districts, because oftentimes we're working on our placements into the early and late spring and trying to have them done and ready to go and get out to our families. By the time summer rolls around, we don't get the information from the state until middle of August. So we don't know what the final ratings are for teachers often until very late in the summer. So this could definitely pose some challenges for us as we talk about placing our students with teachers for the upcoming school year. We know that we do have to have new locally negotiated, so working out with our principal and teacher unions, new plans developed and submitted for approval with New York State by November 15th. Of next year. So that's going to be challenging as well, because that's a very short timeline. We don't have a lot of details yet. We won't have them. They're saying June 30th. We see how much the state likes to stick to timelines, but we're not going to have a lot of time to do the work that needs to be done to develop a quality plan that we feel meets our needs, but also meets the requirements from state ed. There's also, I'm not very clear yet, and rereading the bill and also reading some articles as to when we will actually have to implement the new plan. It says effective immediately in terms of the bill itself, but I have read in a couple articles that it may be put off, even though we have to submit in 15, that we might not have to implement the plan until the school year 16-17. But I haven't gotten any confirmation either way on that yet, so we'll be monitoring that very closely. And then the other piece is basically the merit pay for high-performing or top-performing teachers. The governor has gotten through a $20,000 bonus for top-performing teachers. What we don't know is what does top-performing mean, and we also don't know who's paying for that. Does that come out of our local budgets, or is that going to be coming directly from the state, and how are they going to be determining that? And what's the impact on our collaborative culture here in Penfield with a decision like this? So a lot of unknowns in terms of the APPR. This is just a quick kind of synopsis of the ratings, that 50-50 split. So it kind of shows how things will work out. And you can see that, mostly teachers, the highest probability is for teachers to be rated either developing or effective based on this new system. And this is very much dictated right in the legislation that was passed by the legislature. So this is the scale that we'll be working with. What we don't know, again, is how will each rating for each side be determined. The state's going to give us a lot of the growth score piece. They're going to give us strict guidelines on the SLO rating that we don't have yet, and then the details on how to come up with the ratings in terms of the observation portion. But this will be the matrix that we have to use to determine that final rating for our teachers and principals. Other changes. Changes to tenure. Historically and for I don't know, as long as I can remember, and way back when, tenure has been basically a 3-year process for newly hired teachers and principals. Now we're moving to a 4-year probationary period for new teachers and principals. Those teachers and principals must earn a highly effective or effective rating for 3 out of their 4 years of probation. And if they earn an ineffective in the 4th year, the district would then have the option of extending a 5th year to try and improve that situation and keep that person on board. If someone has been tenured in a district prior to coming to Penfield and they were not removed due to poor performance, they could have a 3-year probationary period. And then if someone is a sub and subs in a classroom in a district for 2 full consecutive years, they can have a 2-year probationary period. The other piece of clarification that came through is that non-tenured staff can be removed at any time during that probationary period for statutorily and constitutionally permissible reasons. There was some vagueness in that under the current system as to how that worked during the probationary period for teachers and principals. There's also some changes regarding teacher and principal discipline. If a teacher is rated as ineffective for 2 consecutive years, a district has the option to charge that individual with incompetence. It's a 90-day process and remove them. This is for tenured staff. If a person, an individual teacher or principal is rated ineffective for 3 consecutive years, we will be obligated to charge them with incompetence and remove that tenured individual. And that will be a 30-day process. We would have the option to suspend the person with pay during those procedures, during those time periods. And if someone is charged with physical or sexual abuse of a student, then they can be suspended without pay. And that's a change that has come through on this as well. Also, one change, some of our administrators and teachers also have what's referred to as permanent certification. Now they receive a professional license, which is a longer term license once they have gone through the initial period, and they're required to maintain that license and to undergo 175 hours of professional development every 5 years in order to maintain their license. Now, even those folks who had what they call permanent certification, it's really no longer going to be permanent for principals and teachers. They're going to have to reapply to keep that permanent certification every 5 years, and within every 5-year window, complete 100 hours of SED-approved professional development or continuing ed. Again, we don't know what that's going to look like. We do know it's going to be another set of data that we're going to have to track for our employees along the way to help make sure that people are keeping up with that. We've also been told that for principals, the performance of observations can count toward that 100 hours. What we don't know is how much of that 100 hours can it count toward. Certainly our principals are spending at least that amount of time under the new system conducting observations. So my hunch will be that it'll be able to count for a portion, but probably not all of it. But it's something else that we're really waiting on and we don't have clarity on just yet. So again, we still have very little detail. It's a very skeletal framework of the changes that are going to be coming down the pipe. Hopefully we'll have more information in time for the June 30th deadline so that we can begin working with our teachers and principals to develop the new plans. We're also waiting on that guidance not only from the state but also BOCES as a huge conduit of information for us. I know that I have regional meetings on a monthly basis with other assistant superintendents in the area. Tom meets with the other superintendents in the area, and so we'll be having conversations with them about how we're going to manage the change and what information they're gathering as well, and hopefully be able to provide some clarity in the near future. And as more information becomes available, we'll be sharing it with the board as well as with the public. So more to come.
Jim, thank you very much for a very thorough presentation of whatever we know up till now and might change. Board members, questions or comments? Barb?
Okay.
Please don't look at me like I'm the messenger.
No, I know you're the messenger. My first question has to deal with so that, and if you can help to answer this, because again, is this only for the teacher of record? What are everything that's going on for like support staff, related service? I mean, everybody else that is not involved with the testing.
Right. This is for, well, it's for all teachers and principals. So this won't affect our counselors. This won't affect our psychologists, our social workers, things of that nature, but it is for teachers and principals. So even though they might not teach a course that ends with a state assessment, they are still under the APPR process that
Right.
we have now. But we have those other folks who are still under the old system. So for our teachers and principals, they fall under APPR.
Okay, but for that related service piece or support staff, psychologists, counselors, speech therapists, do they also get the highly effective in, so, okay.
No, they would still fall under the evaluation system as was agreed upon in the last teacher contract or
Right.
principal.
So our current teacher contract it's two subsets. It's people under the APPR and people who are not under the APPR, which means they still get observations like they were agreed to in the contract. And as you mentioned, there are many of the service providers, the counselors, social workers, speech pathologists, library and media specialists who have a different role in the building
Right.
as opposed to having a classroom of students every day. And so a lot of it is, I mean, and please, I like what Jim said, is don't look at him for answers. I just want, and I know that with this board, but I just want to say a thank you to Jim for being very sort of thorough and transparent with what we know now.
Right.
Because I know there are going to be many people who are going to answer this question in a different way, which was, we don't know, we're waiting. And instead, last week, Jim spent a lot of time going through all of this to see what we can pull out and being very proactive. He did a good job also presenting information without sounding frustrated at all. I was very impressed with that ability. And it's also because I do like comparisons. You know, we do have a comparison between Mark's presentation and Jim's, which is, this is a lot out of our control. When we talk about the backlog at SED, we're not the only district facing that. Their backlog, at least before the Tuesday update, was about 800 projects. We're not the only district facing all these changes from Albany. So there's going to be a lot of discussion and talk on what this really is going to look like when it gets put together.
Right, and my biggest thing is I'm trying to help you, help our community try to understand it even as much as we can.
Okay.
There's just one other question that I have about the certification and professional development, 100 hours. When does it say that these people do these 100 hours? Is it during the school day, so they will be out of the, I mean, I'm just saying.
It hasn't been specified, for example, for our current folks who are professionally certified. That can take various forms. It can be during the school day, some of it's after hours. You know, they are not clear yet on what their guidelines are going to be. Maybe they will include something about when such professional development must take place or continuing ed must take place. Maybe they won't. My hope is that they won't, and that we can be flexible and continue to provide a wide variety of opportunities for our teachers and principals, some things that do take place during the school day and many offerings that are in the evenings or things of that nature. So hopefully we'll continue to have that flexibility. We'll wait and see.
And the only other point about that grant, the $20,000 bonus, in the article that I read, they used the word, it would be a grant. And was that something that you...
I did not seem to read it that way in the bill,
Okay.
but I can go back and look again and try to get clarification on that as well.
The article that was in the DNC, they referred to it as grant money towards these high top performers. So that was my question. Is it a grant? Where are we going with this? But if you do not hear that, okay.
Yeah.
You didn't see it.
Not yet.
Thank you.
Not yet.
Thank you. Board members, any additional questions? Lisa?
I won't look at you.
That's okay. Oh, it was the glare. It wasn't that I was being looked at. It was the glare.
To Barb's point, I'm not sure, I had heard some scuttlebutt that there might be some changes for special educators and how they are going to be evaluated in this system. So that's probably part of that unknown piece, but
Yeah, I
just
haven't
bringing it up too.
seen anything that differentiates teachers who hold special education certification
Okay.
from, elementary certification or particular 712 content area certification.
Well, because I know
at this
right now
point.
they can use that SLO sort of piece.
And that depends on what their teaching assignment is.
Right.
So,
It
that's what we
falls
have to
under
wait and see.
if a special education teacher's at the high school level and has students that have Regents exams, it does the number of students they have in their class helps dictate whether they're going to get an SLO through the Regents exam, which would now be potentially a state score through the Regents exams, or more of an SLO that they have a little bit more control over.
Right.
But a lot of that still is up in the air. I haven't seen anything as well around special education changes, but I do know a lot of the uproar as well. There's a lot of uproar across the state around these changes in this bill, but teachers of students with disabilities is on the forefront, I think, of concern.
My other question is, you had sort of talked about a 50-50 split between observation and this growth score, and I thought I read somewhere that the split is not set, that the commissioner's setting that split, or is that not the case?
Well, I think you see it if we go back to the chart here. This is the split. Now, whether it's exactly, the governor wanted 50-50. The governor
Right.
wanted 50%, 50%. I don't think it works out exactly that way when you look at this chart, but this is what it'll be, and I think it's pretty close. So what we'll be doing is, as teacher information, as the data comes in, we gather the information from our observations, and a teacher is rated, as you see across the top, as highly effective or effective, which a vast majority, I think, if not all of our teachers have been rated in the past in the current system. Then we have to go down and see, well, what growth score did they receive? And so depending on what growth score they got, even teachers who are rated highly effective, what we do know is it looks like at best they'll be rated developing. But there's caveats to this. When you go, and I went back to, if a teacher gets an ineffective, if we were to go to that two-test system and they got an ineffective on that left-hand side, automatically they're ineffective overall, even if they were rated highly effective on the observation portion. So it's really going to depend on what we negotiate locally, but then we're crowbarred into this. Regardless of how anything else shakes out, it'll come back to this chart, and we'll be looking at where do the two meet, and that's going to be the rating.
So do we think there's an opportunity for us as a community to do advocacy to the Board of Regents? I mean,
I think this screams advocacy.
Well, that's what I guess
So,
that's
yeah.
what I'm thinking.
Yep.
I mean,
We're-
what is set and what's not set, and then
And again-
who do we have to talk to about that?
Right.
I'm guessing it's the Board of Regents that's going to be, right? Supposed to be doing this between now and the end
Right.
of June?
And again, it's waiting to see, because we don't know the details. So, what do we advocate for when we don't know?
Right,
How do
right.
we get to these ratings across the top and down the left?
Right.
It's tough to say what's going to come out of that.
One of the pieces Jim mentioned is that, sort of this continuous conversation. As an assistant superintendent for instruction, he meets on a regular basis with the assistant superintendents for instruction across the Monroe County area, and really we turn towards BOCES. This is one of those roles that we talk about, that BOCES has a role in that people don't always realize, but Dan White is the district superintendent for BOCES 1. That is our component BOCES. We're part of that BOCES. And so his job really is, unfortunately for him, is to be the go-between between local districts and the state. And so they are poring over all of this as well in terms of what we need to know and what we need to advocate for. I meet every month with the superintendents, including Dan White, and we meet Friday. This is going to be our top agenda item to talk on what we've all heard, what do we think this is going to look like. I agree, I sort of flippantly said this screams advocacy, but I agree, and we'll work with the board as we have in the past to get something together for advocacy, but we want to really be clear, like Jim said, on what are we advocating for right now. Because I think just saying throw it all out, it doesn't get us anywhere. We have to be clear and really specific on, if we're going to advocate, what are we asking for in replace? What do we want it to look like instead? What are our suggestions? And but I absolutely think that in the next couple of weeks we're going to get something together after we talk with the other assistant superintendents and superintendents across the Monroe County area.
Thank you. Thanks, Jen.
Mark?
You had said we're required to provide a plan by November 15th. Did the law include any timeline at which the state or the Board of Regents has to provide their guidances to us? There's a lot of things you said you don't know, but when you were looking at the SLO parameters, these kinds of things, was there a date established which the state must provide us these things for which we need to provide our plan to them?
We were told we'd have the guidance and the details we need by June 30th. That's what was pushed through. Again, we'll see if they stick to it. And that plan should be not only submitted but approved by the 15th as well. So we really probably have to get it in well in advance of that November 15th date so that we have time to get feedback, make any changes. The process for getting these plans approved is pretty arduous. With the last round, with the current plan that was submitted, there was a lot of pushback, a lot of revisions that had to be made and things of that nature for all districts. Because there's a lot of vagueness, even in the details. The details are still sometimes vague, and you would think you wrote something up that matched the guidelines, and you submit it, and then they'd push back and say, no, you need to change this part. So it's going to be a bit of a back and forth then, and then we still have to come back if they want something changed to meet with our various units to make sure it's, we're making an agreeable change. So it's going to be challenging to meet that deadline, to say the least.
Catherine?
Well, I have a comment. And Jim, I thought you did a great job putting this all together because it kind of demystifies, what we've been reading in the paper and whatnot. But then it also is very frustrating to listen to because it sounds very rigged against teachers. It sounds outrageous. It sounds more than just screaming advocacy. It screams just what's really going on here. It doesn't, when you have so many school districts in Monroe County area doing as well as they are, and being, this is an accusation that we're so ineffective. You have to just ask the question, what is really going on here? And I'm very suspect behind the motives of all of this. And I just want to say, I think it's outrageous. I think it's unfair. And I really admire our teachers for the grace that they're showing forth, showing their dedication to their profession, because they're really being tested right now. And this is, I think everybody should be outraged. And I also think I heard this quote from a politician one time who said, you get who you vote for. And people need to pay attention to who's being elected, what they run, what they stand for when they're running, and what we could possibly be facing with every time we have new leaders. So, that's it. I'm pretty upset from what I've just heard.
And your point's very well taken because Penfield was a high-performing district before APPR. We had systems in place that work, and this is another example, I think, of the state making decisions based on districts who are underperforming or performing very poorly. They make a sweeping decision that all districts then have to abide by.
That's right.
And if anything, it doesn't improve our processes and procedures. It may actually end up hindering us.
Yes,
because we had great processes and procedures in place before, and our student performance shows that.
And I think, too, when they make these sweeping changes, they're still not addressing the reasons why kids fail in school. So there's also that.
This is true.
Any additional questions? John?
It's a comment that, legislature's in session till June 17th, so they can just extend what they send to the regions as far as a timetable, and, that's happened many times before, so that might give us an opportunity. And also, Jim did a great job on the bill, and if you look at this bill, most legislators couldn't have read it, okay? And I actually looked at it, and the reason you can't read it is it's a series of paragraphs that aren't related that are put in place. So paragraph 1 is the Tappan Zee Bridge, paragraph 2 is tenure, paragraph 3 is, a park in Saratoga, and it goes on and on and on. So that's just a dysfunction of the process. And you had about, I think, 50 members of the Assembly that actually voted against it, which is like the first time that's happened in a long time. So there's a lot going on that I think we can have a glimmer of hope, but so.
Additional questions or comments? Camille?
I don't think I can say better especially what Catherine just said, so it's hard to find the words to express our frustration, but thank you for the explanation. But we didn't have a gap in between what Mark talked about and what Jim talked about, and so I hate to backtrack, but I just had a quick question and also one comment, because I know that these slides on the budget are what's going to be going out to our community as we explain the budget, and I think that the one where we talk about building a bright future, I think accidentally when we put in the part about the NAM Foundation Award, we dropped about Bay Trail, and I know that if there's a Bay Trail parent in the audience, they're going to be looking to say, oh, what's special about Bay Trail? Because we mentioned the elementaries, we mentioned the high school, and usually with Bay Trail we say school to watch, or we could pick the Science Olympiad or the robotics or just something, because, there's amazing work going on there too, so just to add that back in. But my question about your part of the presentation is that the increase of $150,000 for the light project that drove the capital up a little bit, that, if SED moves as fast as they did last week, and our project, does the 150 come back out? Or because it's April to June, it's more expensive to bid, so that's for sure.
I think we should leave that in because I think at this point, I would still be recommending that we hold off on any bidding on the East Gym work and push that into the next school year. We've had those conversations with
Oh, right, I got the
right,
junior lights,
because
sorry.
it's lights and the East Gym. You know, if we get approval, we're going to rush to lights. You know, most of that, the cost of that's already locked down. That delay, where that delay will really impact us is on the East Gym, because that includes remediation and disposal fees that are going to be, you know, difficult to predict a year out. So, yeah, I think that remains.
Because that's for the following summer.
Correct.
Okay, all right, sorry, I got those mixed up.
So, and I do need, this is sort of a pausing spot, but I do need to pick back up with budget, so.
Before we pick back up with Bud, I just want to mention too, is just to acknowledge Camille's comment about leaving Bay Trail off our Building a Bright Future. And as I already pointed out, I have Winton Buddington, the principal, in the audience. So I can assure you that there will be something on there. Absolutely. And we've done this presentation, now Mark and I, for our roadshow, have used these slides for our presentation at some elementary PTSAs in the high school. We haven't been to Bay Trail yet, so I'm glad you caught it now before I go to the Bay Trail presentation on tomorrow night, I think, or Thursday night. So, yeah, thank you. And obviously wasn't meant to leave anybody off the list, so thank you.
Okay. Mark, before we move on to you,
Sure.
I have a question. Jim, the one thing you didn't mention, everybody had a lot of questions and wonderful comments, but you didn't mention anything about Chancellor Tisch's suggestion or that we might have an exemption for high-performing district and all the mixed feelings that are coming with that, you know, that we're not really solving the problem there. And do you know anything about that?
I don't know anything about that yet. I'll have to do a little bit more digging into that. I think that would be great to see that type of flexibility, but I can certainly look into it and try and bring some information back. If nothing else, in an answer to packet questions, but, you know, in a future presentation can have that ready for us as well.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mark.
Now, Mark's going to pick back up with the rest of the budget.
Sure, and a difficult act to follow. But before I start, I think I'd point out two things with regard to Jim's presentation and really the rest of it. And that one of those things is, you know, it's been quite some time since we had a conversation about mandate relief. And we had a governor who promised that. I think, you know, it's useful to reflect on that as we think about where we're at today. And then the other thing that really does tie Jim's presentation together with the previous conversation about lights is those of you that followed the process, there was lots of discussion about who would manage this process. Could it be an independent board? There was a lot of distrust of by the governor's office, I think, of the education establishment. You know, there's no love lost with SED. And the work rightly, I think, and appropriately ended up being assigned to SED, so they're going to manage this process. But they're no better staffed than facilities planning is. They've been operating under the same set of freezes that got us to where we're at with regard to the field lights. So again, you know, the folks that work there, and we all know many of them, are well-meaning, hardworking, decent, good people, but they've just picked up a whole new pile of work in a short time frame to match ours. So, you know, I think it's fair to expect some problems as we work our way through that. So we had finished. We talked a little bit about the revenue side of our budget. 66% of our budget, as you know, 25% from state aid, 66% from the tax levy from our voters. And so we need to review, as we build towards that total revenue side of the budget, we need to take a look at the tax levy and where we are allowed to go in a tax cap environment. So you see here we've got 4 years of experience now. This is 15-16 will be our 4th year under the tax cap since 2012-13. And the point that I always make, but I think is worth repeating here, is that process is designed to constrain districts. It's there's a tax-based growth factor, which is based on the increase of real property, real bricks and mortar construction in your community. So real bricks and mortar for next year our growth factor is 0.3, about 0.4%. That's one factor in the calculation. And the other calculation that makes this the 2% tax cap is we then use a factor that's either equal to the lesser of the rate of inflation or 2%, whichever's less. So in the days in 12-13 when inflation was running at 3.2%, we used 2. We used 2 when it was 2.1% inflation rate. And then when inflation dropped to 1.46, we used 1.46, and we'll use in that calculation 1.62 for next year, the rate of inflation. So it's designed over time to always trail. It has to. The math has to trail the rate of inflation. It's designed in that calculation to gradually squeeze districts. What it turns out to be in a fairly complicated calculation for us is 2.41%. So that's consequential for us for this year. If our levy increase is under 2.41%, if it's under that $59 million, $59.9 million, the two things occur. This year, two things occur. The budget will only require a 50% majority. The traditional, half the people plus one is a successful budget. To go over that would require a 60% supermajority. And the other consequential piece of this year's conversation is this is the second year of the governor's tax freeze proposal from last year. So for all districts last year that were under the cap, you received just about election time, around November, I think, for most people, a check from the state of New York reimbursing you for the amount of the tax rate increase. This will be the second year of that if two things happen. If we stay under the cap, if we stay under 2.41%, and if we submit an efficiency plan showing savings to the state of New York by June. We're in the process of developing that efficiency plan. We're cooperating as a county. Essentially what we are considering, and it will be a consequential change, but there are some significant savings to be had. We are considering moving the Rochester Area School Health Plan from a fully insured minimum premium plan to a self-funded plan, a fully self-funded plan. We will save upwards of $8 million per year just in Obamacare taxes by that move. The self-insured plans don't have the taxes that the insured plans do. There's some other efficiencies that can be had there as well. So that we're in the process of that consideration. We're working our way through that. The savings of that, along with some other savings that we believe we can demonstrate, should make the tax cap requirement for all the county districts. So with that, that would mean that as long as we stay as an individual district under the levy, we should meet the requirements of the tax freeze. And once again, for a second year, folks will be reimbursed for any increases. So I think that's consequential. Even before all of this, we did fine. This is a 7-year history of where we've been with regard to our levies and the town of Penfield rate. As you can see, our average over the 7 years is 1.7% just for the levy. So, I think as a community, as a school board, even prior to the adoption in 12-13 of the tax cap, we were abiding really by a self-imposed limit. So that brings us then to a full discussion of the revenue side. So state aid, we're recognizing the $925,000, about a 4% increase in our $23 million budget. We're projecting an increase of $100,000 in sales tax. The pilot decreases. Pilots are payment in lieu of taxes. Those are payments made to the school district by really large taxpayers that are moved off the roll by the County of Monroe Industrial Development Authority. They're essentially tax-free. It's how they get a tax break for creation of jobs, but then they make a payment on a declining scale in lieu of taxes. We have properties coming off that roll, so that's why that goes down. Other revenues, modest change. That's driven really in this case by some declines in federal reimbursement programs, the E-rate program for phone reimbursement, and it's just getting harder and harder to claim Medicare. The the major change here is we propose to reduce our draw from the ERS reserve from $750,000 to $250,000. We think that should set us up for future years. Depending on how that goes, we'll slow that draw from that reserve. We'll increase in our revenue planning this year, in the reserve planning. We mentioned that we begin a 4-year process of drawing down the tax certiorari reserve. We had a couple of properties come off, or we had several properties that either settled for less than we had reserved, or one property in particular dropped a large claim entirely. So we need to bring that money back. We should use that money to reduce taxes. We're using $81,000 of that for that purpose. So with that set of facts, what we end up with is about $130,000 or so under the cap, a $1.2 million increase in the levy, or 2.2%. That balances the budget, maintains us under the cap, and reduces our draws on reserves into future years. So with that set of changes, and with that particular levy, what that turns into for an estimated rate is 1.2% in the town of Penfield. The significant change here is in Brighton and Macedon. Last year, if you'll recall, the town of Brighton moved from 100% assessment to 97, and now that continues to fall from 97 to 95. That's the equalization rate. What that equalization rate represents is that's not our number. That's a number established by the state of New York based on sales in the community. So whenever a house is sold, that information is reported to New York State Division of Equalization and Assessment, and they're comparing house sales to what homes are assessed at. And essentially what they're saying in the town of Brighton, and for 1% in the town of Macedon, is that the assessments are trailing the house values in the community, that essentially those homes are assessed at about 95% of their full or market value. And so the formula adjusts for that, and a declining equalization rate drives up the tax rate in that particular town, so to ensure that homes of equal value, equal market value, pay equal shares, no matter what the assessment practice in the community is. So that means for both Macedon and Brighton higher tax rates. But you can see here how that plays out. So about 1.2% for most of our taxpayers in the town of Penfield, around 4% in town of Brighton. And with that, of course, I always end with a reminder, because it's very important to us that folks learn about the budget, come to the budget hearing. That's the last formal presentation of the budget on May 5th. And then, of course, the votes on May 19th from 6 to 9 in the high school in the gymnasium. So are there any questions on the remainder of my presentation tonight?
Thank you, Mark. Board members. Catherine.
On the pilot properties, when a property goes off a pilot roll, does that mean that they're paying taxes like everybody else?
Yes.
Okay.
So essentially what happens, and we can see some pilots coming. So for example, it's not anywhere yet. The land, I believe, is still on the general roll, but if you drive down Panorama Trail, the hotel that's going in where Putt-Putt Golf used to be, that will be a pilot project.
Okay.
So what happens when that's completed, the County of Monroe Industrial Development Authority essentially takes ownership of the property, and they're a tax-exempt organization.
Okay.
So because they hold it, it's now completely off the rolls, and in the agreement, in the legal arrangement, they agree to pay a pilot payment to the school district. And it starts out, it's based on our tax rate, but it starts out typically, they can be structured differently, but typically they're 90% tax exempt. So in that first year, they would make a payment of what they would if they'd have been fully taxed. They'd make a payment equal to 10% of that. Okay. The next year, 20%, 30%, 40%. At the 10th year, they're essentially making a pilot payment that's equivalent to their full taxes. And then after that year, County of Monroe deeds it back to them. They go back onto the roll. It's all done, and they're back on our rolls.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's what happens. The confounding factor here, and this has been a source of some advocacy, is that the way the tax cap calculation works is it's intended, it was deliberately designed to do this. If your pilot payments go up, your allowable tax cap goes down. If your pilot payments go down, your allowable tax, it balances it out so that school districts essentially never get a benefit from those pilot agreements. It nets out that change. But then what happens is that one of those factors, the new bricks and mortar factor that I mentioned, 0.3%, will have pilot arrangements that have gone through the pilot process. We never get the credit for that new bricks and mortar. So when it comes back in, nowhere in the calculation, nowhere will we ever see the benefit that we get from in terms of the relief on the tax cap, from new bricks and mortar. So we could have an enormous development if it goes through the pilot process. When it comes back in, it never affects our 0.36. Okay. And I think that's unfair. I think it's wrong, and there's been some advocacy around it. But let's face it, it's a pretty complicated technical issue, and while it matters lots to people like me, it doesn't matter much to other folks. So it just hasn't gotten, I think, the kind of attention.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions or comments?
Carol, can I just add one more thing, just tying Mark's presentation together? There may be some who are wondering, what if we don't meet that November 15th deadline for our plan, either here on the board or in the community, and what happens to the budget really in that case? What I was able to uncover prior to tonight's meeting was there's language in the bill that says if you don't have a plan approved by November 15th, you would not receive your state aid increase, and that would continue for every year that you do not have an approved plan. So as you saw in Mark's presentation, I think it was about $925,000 the first year. Well, that grows exponentially every year you're out of compliance. That's one possible consequence, and that's really a carrot to make sure that both sides, the district and the associations, get the job done. But I would also say that folks need to be careful, as we saw if you followed Kenton schools, Kenmore-Town and Tonawanda schools in the paper in the Buffalo area. Their board publicly passed a resolution to seriously consider not complying with a state mandate. In this case, it was administering the 3 through 8 assessments. They, in very short order, received a very sternly worded email from state ed notifying their superintendent and board president that if they passed such a resolution to actually not comply, that the processes would begin immediately for the removal of the board members. And then they received another formal letter in similar regard from state ed. So, there's carrots there. There are impacts. Oftentimes we hear, well, there's no impact if you're not in compliance with these unfunded mandates. We're seeing that there are, and we're seeing that state ed is taking noncompliance very seriously. And there would be a financial impact to the district. And then ultimately, if we want to maintain program and we lose $900,000, there's an impact on our taxpayers there as well. So I just think it's important that people are clear that we need to be careful about the decisions we make and try to balance advocacy and meeting the requirements as we move forward.
Thank you, Jim. That is a great clarification. Thank you. Great. So this concludes Superintendent's report. Board members, we are on board business right now on page 4 of your agenda, and we have a series of change orders from page 4 all the way to page 9 in your packet. These change orders have been reviewed by and are supported by architect Victor Maselli, project manager Gary Huffman, clerk of the works Alan McNiff, and assistant superintendent for business Mark Sansucci. May I have a motion, please, that these change orders as described in your packet be approved? Questions or comments? Thank you. All those in favor? 7 in favor, none opposed. Thank you. We have no financial items this evening, no policy review either, but we do have an upcoming policy meeting coming. Item D, inspectors of election for the vote of May 19th, 2015. Board approval of election inspectors for the May 19th vote is required. All inspectors in your agenda are eligible voters of the Penfield Central School District. May I have a motion, please, that the board approve the inspectors listed in your agenda for the budget vote and election on May 19th, 2015?
Second.
Questions or comments? Thank you. All those in favor? 7 in favor, none opposed. Thank you. Under President's remark, Tom, we appointed you this evening. However, we do have a little present for you from the board.
Oh, thanks.
Probably we should have done that in the beginning of the meeting, but,
Oh, this is better.
you know.
My kids were in the audience, they'd want it. So thank you very much.
This is for you.
Open it now?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Oh, thank you very much. So it says Superintendent, Penfield Central School District. And I need one of these. That's perfect.
Good.
Thank you very much.
I'm glad you like it. I would be remiss if I did not thank Marcia, who makes things happen at the speed of light, even when she gets an email at the 11th hour. So
Well,
thank you so
It makes me feel
much,
good that for
Marcia.
Board Appreciation Week, I presented you with some gifts from the district, and Marcia also picked those out. So thank you, Marcia.
Thank you, Marcia. Also, under President's remark, well, we all went to Albany. That was a very interesting trip, and I wasn't too sure if we wanted to put this under unfinished business, new business, so I figured under President's remark, and I think Mark is gonna give us a little bit of summary of what we did there.
Thank you, Carol. On March 23rd and 24th, a number of us went to Albany. The then acting superintendent, Dr. Putnam, Carol Nazara, John Piper, Camille Rutan, and myself all went, along with the Monroe County School Board Association, to meet with our representatives and others in Albany. It was actually very successful. We delivered a number of letters to the governor that were the advocacy letters that provided by our community to Dr. Putnam to give to the governor. We also were able to actually meet personally with Mark Johns, Joe Morelli, and Rich Funk, who are the representatives who cover our district. Funky, yes. And it was nice because this was in the midst of their negotiations, and they were all able to take time out and speak with us. And it was very constructive and respectful meetings. They listened to us, and they also were very candid about where negotiations were going and what they expected to have happen and not happen. So it was a very good, constructive meeting, and it helped maintain those relationships between us when we went there as your representatives and your other representatives, which would be in the state legislature. And we're going to continue to do this advocacy as your representatives. And really, the important part of this is to advocate for the needs of the district, to educate our representatives of the impact of the decisions. And as was mentioned earlier, they couldn't have read the bill they signed because of the way it was written. And a lot of times, the details and the nuances, they don't know, and they'll never know because it's really outside of their purview. And it's something that it's our job to educate them on. And so we'll continue to do that. And I just wanted to mention the comment that you get what you vote for, which is true. Mm-hmm. I think the other part of this is you don't just vote once, and we don't have to just vote once. Every letter you write, every communication you send is a vote, and it's not like a real vote, but for representatives, they see this as a potential future vote, and it's very important. And this is where advocacy is really the right way to go in talking about what's important to us, what we like, what we don't like, is to really communicate with them as a board, as administration, and as a community, to keep sending that message to them, because they hear that and they do respond to that, in time, and it goes at a pace that it goes. But that's really the way we go about making the changes.
Thank you, Mark. And indeed, this board is very thankful to the community for the 450-some letters that we were able to take and deliver to the governor's office. It's been a great, successful advocacy effort led by Dr. Putnam, and I think this was really great. We're very proud of delivering this very thick file of letters. That was really good. All right. And now we move on to unfinished business, board meeting schedule. You have a list of the meetings for next year. The annual vote will take place on May 17th, and special meeting will be scheduled as required. All meetings will be held at 7 p.m. in the library at the senior high school unless otherwise noted. Please note that there is one meeting, which is October 22nd, which is going to be on a Thursday because of how it falls with New York State School Board Convention. So at this time, please, may I have a motion, please, to approve the 2015-2016 board meeting schedule as noted in your agenda?
So moved.
Questions or comments? Thank you. All those in favor? 7 in favor, none opposed. Thank you. And there being no further business, may I have a motion, please, that the meeting be adjourned at 8:50 p.m.? Questions or comments? Thank you. All those in favor? 7 in favor, none opposed.